Paul walked into Corinth alone. Jesus said, "No, you didn't. I've got people here already."
Paul arrived in Corinth afraid and alone, but Jesus has already filled the city with people, workbenches, and unexpected grace. You're listening to the Semi-Seminarian, and I will see you on the other side. Well, we left Paul standing on the Areopagus last Sunday in Athens, the marvel and the mind of the ancient world, and Paul built the best sermon he could build inside of it, starting with their own altar inscription, quoted their own poets, gave the resurrection everything he had. And what happened? A few believed, a few laughed. Most of them said, "We'll hear you again about this," which is the first century Athenian way of saying, "Fascinating, we'll circle back." Athens didn't throw stones. Athens didn't run Paul out of town. Athens just lost interest. And that might be the worst one yet. Because this man has been on a road. We've been on the road with him. Beaten and jailed in Philippi, smuggled out of Thessalonica under the cover of darkness, sent away from Berea because the trouble followed him south like a stray dog, and then in Athens, where nobody tried to kill him, and nobody much cared. So he leaves Athens for Corinth. Corinth is not Athens. If Athens were the university, Corinth is two separate seaports straddling a land bridge with every kind of commerce the Roman world could invent, and a few it'd rather not talk about. City has a reputation in the ancient world that made its own name a verb. To Corinthianize was to live without a ceiling and without a floor. It was an enormous, roaring, indifferent, wide-open machine of a city, and Paul walks right into it, the way that any tired stranger may walk into a town that's just not expecting him, alone, with a tent maker's hands, and whatever is left of his nerve. And the very first thing Luke tells us is not what Paul preached, it's who he found. And you know this walk. You have been driving all day, or you've been carrying something so long your arms forgot what empty felt like. You push through a door into a room that doesn't know your name, city that's not expecting you, the noise of 1,000 lives already running at full speed and none of them pausing just because you showed up. You're not lost. You know exactly where you are. You just don't know whether it mattered that you came. And then you round a corner and there's a face. Somebody already there, already working, already making room, not because they heard you were coming, but because that's where God put them before you left home. That is the sound and the feel of Corinth. Not the commerce and the reputation, the face you didn't expect, in a place you were already afraid of, now already at the workbench when you walked in. Friend, I invite you to attune your ears this evening to the reading of Holy Scripture. My passage tonight comes to us from the Acts of the Apostles. Tonight we're reading in chapter 18, and I'm going to begin with verse 1. After these things, Paul departed from Athens and came to Corinth. He found a certain Jew there named Aquila, a man of Pontus by race, who had recently come from Italy with his wife Priscilla, because Claudius had commanded that all Jews to depart from Rome. He came to them, and because he practiced the same trade, he lived with them and worked, for by the trade they were tent makers. He reasoned in the synagogue every Sabbath and persuaded Jews and Greeks. But when Silas and Timothy came down from Macedonia, Paul was compelled by the Spirit, testifying to the Jews that Jesus was the Christ. When they opposed him and blasphemed, he shook out his clothing and said to them, "Your blood be on your own heads. I am clean. From now on, I will go to the Gentiles." He departed there and went into the house of a certain man named Titius Justus, one who worshiped God, whose house was next to the synagogue. Crispus, the ruler of the synagogue, believed in the Lord with all of his house. Many of the Corinthians, hearing, believed, and were baptized. The Lord said to Paul in the night by a vision, "Don't be afraid, but speak, and don't be silent, for I am with you. And no one will attack you to harm you, for I have many people in this city." He lived there 1 year and 6 months, teaching the word of God among them. But when Gallio was proconsul of Achaia, the Jews with one accord rose up against Paul and brought him before the judgment seat, saying, "This man persuades men to worship God contrary to the law." But when Paul was about to open his mouth, Gallio said to the Jews, "If indeed it were a matter of wrong or of wicked crime, you Jews, it would be reasonable that I should bear with you. But if there are questions about words and names in your own law, look to it yourselves. I don't want to be a judge on those matters." He drove them from the judgment seat. Then they all took hold of Sosthenes, the ruler of the synagogue, and beat him before the judgment seat. Gallio didn't care about any of these things. Thus ends the reading of the word. Paul arrived in Corinth thinking he was bringing something. Jesus, speaking in the dark to a man too frightened to sleep, tells him the truth. You were not the first one here. Look at the order that Luke gives us. Paul arrives in Corinth, and before he preaches a single word, before he opens his mouth in any synagogue, before anything at all happens, he finds Aquila and Priscilla. They're already there, not because Paul had sent for them, not because some apostolic strategy planted them in advance. They are in Corinth because an emperor threw them out of Rome. Claudius issued an edict, all Jews out. And Aquila and Priscilla landed here the way that refugees land anywhere, with what they could carry and whatever skills that kept them fed. They were tent makers, same trade as Paul, which means Paul walks into a shop and finds them the way a carpenter finds another carpenter already framing the wall. Paul walks in and they're there, already sewing. And I wonder if you caught what just happened. First thing that occurs in Corinth, not a sermon. It's a workbench. Two people Paul has never met already doing the same work with their hands, and the mission starts not with a pulpit or a crowd or a dramatic confrontation, but with a shared awl and a piece of leather. Paul doesn't start a church in Corinth. He finds a kitchen table. Then he reasons in the synagogue every Sabbath. Then opposition comes. He shakes out his garment, says, "Your blood on your own heads," and walks out. This is not Paul cursing the synagogue. This is a heartbroken Jewish man releasing himself from an argument he knows he's losing, and the house he walks to is close enough to hear the Psalms through the wall. Because look where he goes. Next door. Verse 7. Paul goes to the house of Titius Justus, a God-fearing man, a Gentile who had already been worshiping the God of Israel, whose house was next to the synagogue. Paul doesn't cross town. The gospel doesn't relocate him to a safer neighborhood. It moves one wall over. And you know what? We have watched this happen time after time after time through Acts. Grace does not travel far when a door closes. It just opens the next one. Who in the story was already in place before Paul arrived? We come to this passage, friends, often looking for Paul's courage. The missionary walking into a hard city, facing opposition, gets divine reassurance, keeps going. That reading isn't wrong, but it's not what Luke is writing. Luke is writing about what's already there. Watch. Every person we just walked through, Aquila and Priscilla, Titius Justus, Crispus, they were all in Corinth before Paul ever even had heard the city's name. He didn't place them there. They were there the way the trees are part of the forest, already rooted, already growing, already part of whatever God was doing in that city before the apostle walked through the gate. And then Jesus just tweets it out. Don't be afraid. Speak. Don't be silent. I am with you. No one will harm you. And then the line that changes everything. For I have many people in this city. Not, hey, go evangelize and find me some people. Not if you preach good enough, I'll give you some people. Not start from scratch in this city and build me a church. I have present tense, many people already mine in this city. Paul's not bringing God to Corinth. God is telling Paul what Paul can't yet see. Jesus already knows people in this city whom Paul hasn't met yet. Paul thinks he's the missionary, perhaps. Jesus informs him that the mission was already running before Paul had ever even packed a bag. And we've watched this happen before in Acts. Every time. Pentecost, Cornelius, the Ethiopian on the Gazan road, Lydia at the river. The Spirit is already at work before the preacher arrives. Paul is learning in Corinth what Peter learned in Caesarea. You are not the first one here. You're not the reason that this is happening. You are being invited into something that God has already done. Now, look at the word Jesus chooses. I have many people, Laos, in this city. It's not a generic word for humans in a geographic area. Laos is the Septuagint's covenant word for Israel. It's the word the Greek Old Testament uses when God says, my people. And Jesus takes that word, the word that also belonged to the burning bush and the Red Sea and the pillar of cloud, and then applies it to the people in Corinth whom Paul has never met. Jesus knows them as his before Paul knows them at all. Paul looks at Corinth and sees a city. Jesus looks at Corinth and sees a congregation. This is just grace outrunning the preacher. And notice when Jesus says it, verse 9, in the night by a vision. The night visions in Acts are not routine messages, they're crisis interventions. Paul saw the Macedonian calling in the night before he crossed into Europe. He will hear the Lord again at night in the Jerusalem barracks after his arrest, and again on the ship before the wreck. Every one of these comes when the mission is hanging by a thread, and then God breaks into the dark. And Corinth is one of them. Paul is afraid, not theologically afraid, not bracing for future trouble, afraid right now, afraid enough to stop talking. This is a man who survived a stoning in Lystra, who sang hymns in a Philippian jail, and Corinth has frightened him into silence. The accumulated weight of rejection has landed on him all at once. And what does Jesus say to a scared man in the dark? Not be strong, not remember what you survived, not I will destroy your enemies. I have many people in this city. The answer to Paul's fear is not a stronger wall. It's an unseen family. You're not alone here. There are people in Corinth you cannot yet see, and they're already mine, and you will find them when the sun comes up. Then the Gallio trial, verse 12. The Corinthian Jews haul Paul before the bema, the judgment seat, the same kind of machinery that ended the mission in Philippi. Gallio, the proconsul of Achaia, the brother of Seneca, a man with full weight of Rome behind his chair. Here's the charge and says something I think is remarkable. If it were a matter of wrong or wicked crime, I would bear with you. But questions about words and names in your own law, see to it yourselves. I refuse to judge these things. Gallio doesn't acquit Paul. He doesn't examine the evidence and declare the gospel somehow legal. He refuses the entire category. As far as Rome is concerned, this is a family argument amongst Jews. And Rome won't waste an afternoon on this. He drives them from the judgment seat. And in that refusal, in the empire simply declining to care, the gospel gets room. Not endorsement, not permission, room. Same imperial indifference that keeps Gallio from persecuting Paul also keeps him from protecting Sosthenes, who's now beaten in front of the same bema one breath later. Gallio cares nothing about these things. That's not a compliment. That shrug that gives the gospel room also gives violence room. But God used the space. Paul stayed 18 months. Church put roots in the dirt of Corinth, deep enough that Paul would spend years writing letters back to that church. Letters we still read. Letter that I quote every Sunday before the table. Letters that shape the faith we carry into this room every Wednesday night. None of it would have happened if the mission had departed on Paul alone. Paul walked into Corinth believing what most of us believe when we walk into a hard room. He believed the outcome depended on him, his words, his courage, his willingness to stand up one more time after getting knocked down. He had every reason to believe that too. He had been carrying the gospel across Asia Minor and into Europe and on his own scarred back. And every city had drawn blood or shown him the door. Of course, he thought it was on him. And Jesus comes along and says, it's not. I have many people in this city. These people weren't Paul's recruits. They're not raw material, just waiting for the right sermon to activate them. Jesus calls them mine before they hear a word from Paul. Aquila and Priscilla were making tents before Paul arrived. Titius Justus already had an open door. Crispus was already listening. The mission didn't begin when the preacher showed up. Mission is what the preacher shows up into. Paul is afraid in Corinth, and Jesus doesn't make him braver. He just shows him his people. And I think we need to sit with that one for a second, because most of us, when we're scared, ask God to make us stronger, right? Thicker skin, better arguments, more endurance. We want God to reach inside of us and fix whatever is broken so we can walk back into the hard room and handle it. And Jesus doesn't do that for Paul. He doesn't touch Paul's courage at all. He touches Paul's sight. Look again, I'm here. And there are people in this city you've not yet met, and they are mine, and you're not doing this by yourself. The remedy for the fear was never more courage. It was just a wider view. Because if God already had people in the city, in every room, and every place you've ever been afraid to speak, then the weight is not fully yours to carry. The outcome does not ride on your eloquence or your endurance or your willingness to take one more hit. The people aren't yours. They belong to the one who claimed them before you ever even knew their name. Your only job was to show up, find the workbench, open your mouth, and discover who God has already set next door. And if you're following along with us, we're going to see something on Sunday that grows directly out of tonight. Paul eventually leaves Corinth. He has to. The road keeps calling. What happens when the apostle's gone? Well, I want to hold that question until this week, but hold it in a way you hold a seed before you put it in the ground. But tonight, sit with this. You're not the first one in the room, and you never were. God has people in places you've not been brave enough to go, in rooms you didn't think you were welcome in, and beside rivers you haven't found yet. Behind doors you have not had the courage to open, and God has had them there for longer you have ever even been on the road. Paul learned it the only way that anybody learns it, the hard way, in the dark, when he was too scared to keep preaching, and Jesus had to show up and say it to his face, I have many people in this city. You are not alone here. You were never supposed to do this alone. And the God who has people in Corinth has people in this room too. People you've not yet seen, people you don't know are his, people who are here before you arrived and will carry this after you're gone. Your job is just to keep talking, keep showing up, keep setting up the workbench, because the people are already here. So, may the God who speaks to frightened creatures in the dark speak to you. May you walk into rooms you are afraid of and find that grace has already arrived ahead of you. May you discover companions at workbenches you didn't build, in kitchens you did not furnish, and on roads you didn't pave. And may you hear in whatever quiet, frightened place you carry your doubt in tonight the same voice that found Paul in the dark and said what it says to you this very second. Do not be afraid. Speak. Do not be silent. I am with you. I have many people in this city. Go in that peace. Amen. Paul thought Corinth depended on him. Jesus knew better. People were already there, grace was already moving, and the work had already begun. So keep showing up, keep speaking, keep looking for the workbenches next door. You're not alone. You were never the first one here anyway. And until next time, friend, please be blessed.